Fine. So we are going to start, as you start every single day, with tzedakah and some tzedakah and some 2 chapters of Tehillim. So your dollar bill or coin, give it to tzedakah. And we'll start with Tehillim for our brothers and sisters in the Holy Land of Israel. First chapter 20 and then chapter 150. Lam Natsayach Mizmor LeDavid Yan Chadinov Yem Sarais Hakav Hashem Elahei Yaakov Yishlach Ezer Kami Kodesh Mitzion Yisadeka Yisra Kami Chesach Avaylas Yadash Nesela Yitain Lechach Yavavecha V'chalatzas Yimalei Niran and Rabbi Shusecha Oveshem Elahinu Nidgal Yimali Adinoi Kami Shalisecha Tiyadat Shir Adonai Mashiach Yanei Mishmer Gacha Bigvur Seisha Yeminoi Ela Berecha Vela Basus and Menachnu B'Shem Adonai Elahinu Naskir Hey Makaru V'Nefalu V'Nachnu Kame V'Nisaida Adonai Yeshia Melech Yaneinu V'Yayim Kareinu Hallelujah Hallelujah V'Kadshay Hallelujah B'Kiya Uzay Hallelujah B'Goresav Hallelujah Koroi Kudloi Hallelujah B'Seika Shofar Hallelujah B'Nebel B'Chinar Hallelujah B'Zayf Machal Hallelujah B'Mini V'Ugav Hallelujah B'Zilzle Shama Hallelujah B'Zilzle Serua Kol HaNeshama Hallelujah Hallelujah. We'll continue here with the Gemara, MEsechta Megillah Daf Yud Ches Amud Beis, continuing the explanation of the Mishnah, which the Mishnah stated, if one read the Megillah while napping, they have fulfilled their obligation. So the Gemara will identify what type of napping. It doesn't say yashin, sleeping. It says misnamnim. Misnamnim means sort of dozing off. So the Gemara will give an exact definition of what it means. There was one time in a certain city where there was a big flood, and a big part of the city was flooded, and the shul was in very high ground. So the mayor of the city called up the rabbi of the shul, and they asked him, it's a state of emergency. Could we please use your shul as a shelter? He says, please, for sure. I'll be happy to help. He says, how many people could sleep in your shul? So he says, when I give a speech on Yom Kippur, we have 1,000 people sleeping. All right, so here you have this comic saying about how the all-night Shavuos learning was as lively as usual. Sounds a little bit like our next Gemara over here. So continue the Gemara. If you have an art scroll Gemara, it's 18b2, the bottom of the first column. There's a few on the table if you need. In the Gemara itself, it's about 5 lines from the bottom of the narrow lines. Misnamnim, if somebody was dozing off while reading the Megillah, yatsa v'chulu, they have fulfilled their obligation of reading the Megillah. So the Gemara asks, Heichi dami misnamnim, what type of dozing off are we speaking about? Amar Rav Ashi, says Rav Ashi, when it says that reading the Megillah while dozing off, your yotze is someone who's nim v'lo nim, asleep and not asleep, not quite fully asleep. Tir v'lo tir, aware of what's going on, but not fully aware, partly awake. The difference of these 2 descriptions, asleep and not asleep, awake but not awake, one is referring to the beginning of the sleep, when you go to sleep, when someone's starting to doze off, and tir v'lo tir is when one is starting to wake up. And he gives an example. How can you tell if someone is in such a state? Tir v'lo tir. For example, the kadilei, if you call somebody by name, v'ani, and I'll answer you. So they're able to aware a little bit of what's going on. V'lo yada lahadure sivara. However, they do not know how to answer any question that takes a little bit thinking, a little bit logical reasoning to figure out the answer. But if you remind them of something, they'll remember right away. So in the Mishnah rules that when somebody can read the Megillah half asleep, it's talking about someone's in such a state. They have partial cognizance of what's going on, but not full awareness what's going on. This is specifically referring to somebody reading the Megillah.
Yeah, the actual reader or hearing it?
The reader.
The reader.
Yeah. The reader is half dozing off. But if the listener is half dozing off, then they're not yet say they've not fulfilled their obligation, because it's inevitable that he's missed a couple words. But the reader, as long as he read every word, even if he's half dozing and waking up and dozing while he's reading it, but he read every single word properly, so he did not miss any words. So that's definitely then he's fine, and obviously not ideal, but he has fulfilled his obligation of hearing the Megillah. The Bach tries making a difference in whether one is falling asleep or one is waking up. He says if one is falling asleep, so then they could still be partially aware. But if one is in the process of waking up and then they read the Megillah, he's not Yotzei. But the halacha, no one else goes according to the Bach, and as long as you read every word properly, then you're Yotzei. And part of the issue is, we're going to have in the next Gemara that the Bach brings up, is one has to have kavana, intent, to read the Megillah, to hear the Megillah. We're going to see from the next Gemara. So how could somebody have kavana, intent, if they're half sleeping? So he says, therefore, when one's falling asleep, they had at least intention in the beginning, I'm going to read the Megillah. But if one is starting to wake up, they don't yet have proper intention, kavana, to hear the Megillah. But other Rishonim and the other poskim don't go according to the Bach, and it says, as long if one is half dozing, doesn't matter if one is waking up or going to sleep, as long as they read the entire Megillah, they're Yotzei, they fulfill their obligation. But one listening to the Megillah cannot be half dozing. If one was sort of falling asleep while hearing the Megillah, they need to hear the Megillah again, because every word in the Megillah is important, and you have to hear the Megillah in order. Now, one other aspect which comes out from here is, what is the definition, the halachic definition of hearing Megillah? When you hear the Megillah, is it like you're reading it? Or it's called Shemei Ka'ina, you're merely hearing it, and with that you fulfill your obligation. And there's several halachic differences, but one of the differences would be when it comes to benching. Benching, if one does not know Hebrew, they could bench in Hebrew. They could say the benching in Hebrew, and they're Yosef, fulfill their obligation. If one is listening to benching, it's best to, and they don't understand Hebrew, Shulchan Aruch says, best that they should say benching to themselves in their own language. Because Hebrew, Lashon Kodesh, is a very holy language. It's the building blocks of creation, the building blocks of the world. We've learned earlier, hearing the Megillah in Hebrew, even though you don't understand, you fulfill your obligation. So the Hebrew language itself is very unique and very special. You can hear the Megillah. However, someone who does not understand Hebrew and hear the Megillah, technically, what's the difference between them and someone who's dozing while listening to the Megillah? Sort of falling asleep, as our Gemara is discussing. If one is falling asleep while hearing the Megillah, they haven't paid good attention, proper attention to every word. So in a similar sense, if someone does not understand the Hebrew language and they hear the Megillah, we say they're Yosef, fulfill their obligation. It should be sort of the same thing as over here. So there's the Vilna Gaon brings this down, and he brings a difference from, it says in MEsechta Brachas about benching. But he says the major difference is when you're hearing the words, the fact that you're hearing it, even though you don't understand the language, you heard every single syllable. When you're half dozing when you're listening to it, you look like the people in this picture over here, and you definitely have been missing out something. So when it comes to benching, is a mitzvah to bless Hashem. You have to either understand what you're saying or say the words in Hebrew to understand what you're saying. When it comes to the Megillah, you could, even if you don't understand the Hebrew tongue, you could be say. However, when you are dozing, it's different because you're actually missing some of the words that are being said. We'll continue with the next Gemara. So we could X out of that. The next Gemara goes through it touches upon a topic which is discussed in many places in Shas. Mitzvah srichas kavana. Do you have to have in mind intention to fulfill a mitzvah? If one does a mitzvah unwittingly, unknowingly, have they fulfilled the mitzvah? And there's Gemara over here, which is going to discuss this. Gemara MEsechta brachas, which will discuss this. MEsechta Rosh Hashanah. Somebody's walking by a shul and they heard the shofar. Have they fulfilled their obligation? I'm blowing the shofar for someone on the street. Someone else walking by heard the shofar. Have they fulfilled their obligation? I was one time in Rosh Hashanah. I walked to Crown Heights from Borough Park. You walk through Prospect Park. And I came to a place where I saw like literally hundreds of people and asked what's going on. We're having a big movie shoot over here. And we're about to start a scene. I said, great, stop. I'm about to blow the shofar. So the guy was Jewish, says, please just wait, don't do it now. I said, do you think you gathered here to make a movie shoot on Rosh Hashanah? You gathered here to hear the shofar. And I blew the shofar and I had to wait a few minutes. But that was it. And I'm sure there was more than one Jew there. What do you think they gathered for on Rosh Hashanah morning? To hear the shofar. Yeah. Right?
Because they're knowing issue why you're doing it, right?
Well, the Jews knew why I was doing it. They were probably embarrassed, and the non-Jews thought it was so beautiful. Sure. So, do the mitzvah need kavanah intention? There's a famous story. Rabbi Khan, the Rebbe's Chayzer, the one who was you could say, a human tape recorder for the Rebbe. Farbrengens on Shabbos and Yom Tif. So Rabbi Khan, he's by the Rebbe's Farbrengens, famous chassid. Unfortunately, passed away without children, but he wrote many Sfarim Chassidus, Encyclopedia Talmudis. Rabbi Darren talks about him many times. Rabbi Darren had the opportunity that Rabbi Khan was his teacher when he was 13, 14, 15 years old. He talks about him a lot. One of the phenomenal minds of Chassidus, definitely in our generation. So his father, his name was Rafal Nachman Khan. Rafal Khan. He has a book. It's translated into English as well, which it says the book is called "In the Shadow of the Iron Curtain" or Behind the Iron Curtain. It's a little bit of a biography, but here's Rafal Nachman Khan. So he was arrested during the 1930s, and he was sent for 3 years to Siberia by the communist government, by the Soviets, Socialist Republic of Russia. It's funny, he never had a trial. He just got a summons to come show up one day to a meeting. He came to the meeting, he was interrogated, and then they told him he was let out, you're being led to your cell. Like, what am I being arrested for? No answer. He had interrogations every few days, went on for about 2 months. Then he waited for about 4 months in a cell, not knowing what's happening. And then one day, there's a transport of prisoners going to sent off to faraway Siberia, and he's put on the transport. He finds out that he's being sent for 3 years to Siberia. I mean, it's a mazel because a couple of years later, people were sent for 10 years or 25 years. He was 3 years. And he was 3 years in Siberia. And he, obviously, during the entire time, he only ate kosher. About Shabbos and Yom Tiv, I think he never wasn't able to be careful all the time. And on Pesach, he was very careful not to eat any chametz. Now, the Jewish prisoners in Soviet Russia who kept kosher, the only thing you were able to eat literally in the prison was bread. The only other thing they would bring you was they would bring hot water, which you can have, and they would bring sometimes, depending on the prison, depending what time period it was, they would bring slush. They would bring some type of soup, which was 99% water, and a tiny bit of vegetable, and maybe some horse meat. Definitely not kosher or whatever it was. And of course, everyone was starving, but as a Jew, as a chassid, they were even more hungry because they wouldn't eat or drink anything at all. And when it comes to Pesach, even the bread you don't have. So the only thing they were able to subsist in prison was, if you were lucky, you managed to somehow get some cubes of sugar, which was like a big commodity. But they weren't serving whole meal plans like they have here in the Allegheny prison. They weren't giving carbs and fibers and vitamin C and making sure they had vegetables.
And of course, actually, before executions, traditionally in the United States, you have actually your last
meal, right?
It's like you can order, my goodness.
Right.
How I get the zakat.
Right. No, they didn't have any of that over there. And so literally you would starve. So unless you were able to get food from somewhere else. So sometimes you'll be able to get some sugar cubes. Very, very rarely, like in prison camps, not in actual prisons, they're able to get potatoes, find a way to either eat them raw or cook them somehow. So they would, if a chassid was in prison, they would start preparing for Pesach from the Pesach before, from the year before already. When Mendel Futterfass was in prison, he was one time happened to have a discussion. He was in a prison cell for a couple of years before he was sent to Siberia, and he had matzah from the previous year that he managed to receive in a parcel from his home, but you never knew if the next year you're going to be able to receive matzah. So he kept 6 matzahs for the next year, and he says the entire year he held on to his matzah. Like, what happened? He went to interrogation, took it with me. He slept. I slept holding the matzah. There's no shelves, no cubbies. You put anything down in the prison cell, other prisoners will steal it, especially if it's food. The entire year, he literally held on to the matzah the entire year. He held onto a package with matzahs, 6 matzahs. He went to sleep, morning, night, evening, wherever he goes, it went with him. And then somebody asked, what happened the next year? Oh, the next year before Pesach, he got a parcel from his family with more matzah.
But when he was actually interrogated, so did he put it in his clothes or what?
I'm not sure exactly. They carry it with him. I'm not sure exactly what happened.
Maybe they didn't mind,
Right. So Pesach and getting matzah in Russia was very difficult, and so Chassidim in prison had a very difficult time. So Rafal Nachman Khan was 3 years in Siberia, and over his 3 years in Siberia, he managed to fulfill 3 different halachas. One halacha is what to do if you have matzah but not maror. One halacha is what to do if you have maror but not matzah. And third halacha is what to do if you don't have matzah and you don't have maror. So it was 1 year when he was in prison, when he was in exile in Siberia, a little town called She, which was a town past the Arctic Circle, where there were only people who lived in the town were usually KGB clerks and a few nomads, a few natives called the Lapps, who lived in tents, reindeer tents made out of reindeer skin and reindeer horns, and they drank reindeer blood. And literally that's all there was. So as prisoners, a few clerks from the KGB, and many natives, the Lapps. And that's who was in this little town, village, if you want to call it, called She. And it was so windy, people would be blown off the roads, whatever roads there were. And he has all these stories how he was snowed in one time, and for 48 hours, nobody knew where they were, and miraculously someone came to save them. So Rafal Nachman Khan, one Pesach, when he's in Siberia, he did not have any matzah, any maror. And there was actually a clerk who was not Jewish, she was anti-Semitic, a post office clerk. And although he received a parcel that from his family, she refused to give it to him. She kept on lying. You haven't received anything, nothing here in the mail for you. And there were other parcels received from his family that she destroyed. Really, a woman who really an anti-Semite. And it came Pesach, and he had no matzah, no maror. He drank. He had a tiny bit of sugar, so 4 cups of wine. He had 4 cups of sugar water. And surprise of surprise, he pulled out 3 matzahs and called a few Jews together. He made a seder. He says, "Where do you have these matzahs? I kept it from last year. I already knew." And he gave out the matzahs. And the next night came to the seder. There's no matzahs. So what happened to your matzahs? I have nothing left. The other Jews got so upset at him. What? Why didn't you tell us last night? We would not have eaten your matzah. We know for you, it's all you're going to eat on Pesach. And he says, if I would have told you that that's only matzah I have, you wouldn't have wanted to eat it. But I wanted you to eat matzah on Pesach and by the seder. So therefore, I didn't tell you. But the rest of Pesach, he had no food, no drink, only a little bit of hot water and a little bit of sugar water. And he literally starved the entire Pesach, didn't eat anything, any solids, whole 8 days of Pesach. And he didn't know that behind the scenes, the clerk who was holding back the package, she one day she comes over to him, offers him a fresh baked cupcake. He hasn't seen such a thing in who knows how long. Please, you look hungry, eat. He says, I can't. The next day she came offering him another pastry. Please eat, you look hungry. And he ignored her. And when it came the later days of Pesach, he was already derelict and he didn't know what was happening. And other Jewish prisoners were trying to get him to eat and wouldn't listen to them. And it was the last night of Pesach. And he fell into a faint and they tried reviving him. And finally woke him up and they told him, Pesach is over. He's like, how could I know to believe you? He told me, for real, we're not trying to fool you. And Pesach was over, made Havdalah, and it took him a while to recover. So everyone saw how dedicated he was to mamish, not eating any chametz on Pesach. And he meant this for real. It ended up being that clerk was found out by the higher ups what she did. She got into major trouble. They wanted to arrest her, and he had to advocate, please don't arrest her. She has a family, she has children. She eventually she was demoted and from any government job, and she was sent away, where she can't be in a position to harm any more prisoners. The next year, again, a different post office clerk, and the problem was that Pesach at that time of the year, many of the rivers started to melt over there in the far north Arctic Circle. So during the winter, you would take a sleigh with a reindeer. During the summer, they would take a truck or a horse and buggy. But during that time of year, there was no way to go. So someone was going to pick up parcels, and they said, all the prisoners there saying, please pick up our parcels. And he says, nope, I'm afraid, any extra weight can make it that we could fall into the river and all die. He went to the big city and in the city, they told him, in the post office of the city, he picked up whatever mail was for the camp. And they told him, what about the parcels? He says, I'm not taking any parcels. I said, don't take the parcels, but there's one which seems very official. You must take this. He says, from Moscow, and from Moscow was a big deal, urgent delivery for whatever. He says, okay, I'll take that one parcel. And this is like 2 days before Pesach, and he goes and he comes back just with that one parcel. And someone saw a name, Fala Khan. He opened it up, and it's a matzah. All the prisoners started jumping around for him, dancing with joy. They knew what happened the year before. Now they're literally dancing for him, jumping with joy. Wow, you're not going to starve this Pesach. Fala Khan turns around to a Jewish prisoner. His name was Ginsburg, who was a very ardent communist from the early communists, but he's probably maybe on the Trotsky side, or just a Jew who was under suspicion. So he was arrested and sent off to Siberia. But someone who was he grew up, I think, going to Cheder, but very, very far from keeping Yiddishkeit. And so Fala Khan tells him, Ginsburg, I want to share my matzah with you. I want to make sure you eat matzah on Pesach. So all the other prisoners turn around to Fala Khan and says, him, Ginsburg? We know he's not like you. He doesn't deserve your special matzah. We see he eats all the not kosher food, all the food that we eat. He doesn't deserve your matzah. Don't give him. For you, it's important. For him, don't give him anything. And these were all criminal prisoners. And they said, you better not give him anything. If we find you giving him anything, we're gonna, beat you up, or we're going to beat you.
Wow.
So he told them, he started trying to explain to them how important it is Pesach, and for him it's important the entire day is not to eat any chametz. He started speaking to Ginsburg, and he awakened in him something. He says, you know what? I'll eat your matzah. So other prisoners told Ginsburg, listen here, you made a commitment, there's no going back now. Here's and we know, don't mess around with Fala Khan. He says, we're going to stand on top of you, make sure you eat this matzah. You better eat it. And we better not catching you eat any chametz the entire 8 days of Pesach. And if we do, we're going to kill you. We have no hesitations. We're going to kill you if we find you eating any chametz entire Pesach.
Now, at first they were going to beat up Khan because he was going to feed Eshe Ginsburg.
With his matzah, right. Exactly.
Interesting prisoner.
And so Ginsburg had no choice in the matter. And it came the night of Pesach.
Mm-hmm.
And now this Ginsburg, being watched by a whole band of criminal prisoners, had to eat the matzah both nights of Pesach, and he didn't touch any chametz the entire Pesach. So let me ask you a question. You have a year before, Fala Khan really wanted to fulfill the mitzvah of matzah. He really, really wanted to eat matzah. Sure, he had the best kavanas he could possibly have. But he didn't end up eating any matzah, unfortunately. The next year, you had a Jew, Ginsburg, who doubtful if he even wanted to eat matzah, but he was forced to. Almost at gunpoint, you could say, to eat matzah. Who fulfilled the mitzvah more? Was it Fala Khan who wanted to do the mitzvah, or was it Ginsburg who actually did the mitzvah?
Well, I think actually they're both actually fulfilled because in others, if I'm not mistaken, of course you can correct me if I'm wrong, but as long as you know the reason why you're doing the mitzvah is because it's a mitzvah, so that's actually having a kavanah.
Mm-hmm.
But nevertheless, though, if you talk about in terms of like if I pay you to shake a lulav, you shake the lulav with some symbiosis, but of course, actually, it's the idea. The only reason why you shake the lulav is to pay you. No, Rich, you can always have higher and higher and
Excellent.
higher.
So Khan didn't fulfill the mitzvah. I mean, he did something very special. It may get him to the highest place in Gan Eden,
Right.
but he didn't fulfill the mitzvah.
Right. So exactly. So we see over here what's important is the act of the mitzvah over the kavanah, over the intention of the mitzvah.
But that's what I'm saying is that actually, if Khan had actually been able to fulfill, so you can say actually that it's like he would have fulfilled it at a higher level because he would have a shikavana, but nevertheless, though, that he fulfill or actually don't. And the minimal would be actually, at least Ginsburg knows why he's doing it. He's having kavana.
Very good. Someone's walking down the street and they see a Jew, and I've seen this happen myself. Might have been involved in it also. Yeah, so someone else asked him to shake a little esrog, and he says no. Right? He's not interested. So then someone else goes over to him and holding a little esrog and says, excuse me, could you just hold this for a second? And he takes it and held it. No, I don't want to do it, and gives it back. Did he fulfill the mitzvah? He didn't have kavanah to fulfill the mitzvah, but he did the mitzvah.
But maybe he did actually briefly have actually kavanah because he knows.
He knows what it is. You're saying a type of kavanah that he actually knows what it is.
Yeah, because he's saying, oh, I know what's going on over here.
Right. So certain things is preferred to have kavanah. Could he be yotze without kavanah? I gave this example at least once before, but Baruch Hashem, it's already our fourth year of shiurim, or definitely fourth year of shiurim. Well, not yet 3 full years. We're in the 4th year. So it was somewhere in the last 3.5 years. This is when there was a time when I worked at one of the major machine matzah companies at Mashkiach, and they used to make more matzah mel than matzah. than square matzah, because they had many orders for matzah mel, for matzah crush. Why? So because some of the very large chain fast food joints, I'm not going to name any names, but for example, some that make burgers and some that make other types of food like that, they sell their product by weight, and it's all full of preservatives and junk and flavorings and who knows what. Very little, probably the meat inside is batal b'shishim. It's like probably very little meat inside. In order to add weight, they add on lots of matzah mel because it's flavorless, right? There's no flavor, and it's heavy. It's solid. It's flour. So a lot of it is actually a lot of not naming any companies. So because who knows where it's going to go out to, but some of these large companies would put a lot of matzah mel into their product.
You're talking about a kosher?
No, non-kosher. No, something non-kosher.
Yeah.
Imagine one of these, I don't know, the Golden Arches type of style fast food joints. So some other similar type of, I don't think McDonald's was a customer, but some other similar type of ones, right? That they just used it to add weight.
Oh, I think I know where you're going.
You understand where I'm going?
Yeah, I think
So let's say there is a Jew who unfortunately doesn't know or doesn't appreciate anything about Yiddishkeit. Hello?
Well, they are all there.
Very little about Yiddishkeit. Goes the night of Pesach, goes to his favorite fast food joint, buys whatever, a burger, or buys whatever the thing is, and he eats. It he ended up eating a kazayis, olive size of matzah. Has he fulfilled his obligation of matzah that night?
But if he's not having kavanah,
he has no idea even that he's eating matzah.
yes, so I think that in that case, probably.
I mean, I guess, yes, but that's a little tricky.
I mean, I think honestly it's a chesed, a kindness of Hashem,
Yeah.
that maybe he makes many Jews, I don't know, how can I say it's a kindness, eating not kosher food, but at least some Jews will fulfill the mitzvah of matzah in such a way. The Rebbe spoke about the idea, I don't think he spoke about it, written in letters, the idea of taras hamishpacha and mikveh. How unfortunately it's in American Jewish culture, it's so not, it's so, and I say abandoned almost. The Rebbe says, I'm trying to, almost be like Reb Levi, I'm saying to be like a Reb Levi Yisrael, find something good. And he says it's very common for many people to go swimming nowadays, perhaps. And he says mikvah does not need kavanah. Mikvah to go to the Beis Hamikdash, Teishos Tar needs kavanah, but to leave Tumah doesn't need kavanah. So perhaps Hashem made it that B'diavad, could somehow find a way to and make kashrus among many Jews.
Well, yeah.
Mikvah does not need kavanah.
Yeah, it's like it should be at least actually
something. I don't know.
Yeah.
You can't say anything halachically,
yeah.
but at least in Hashem's eyes, maybe something.
Does I mean swimming actually b'diavad would be okay, or
No, you have to ask a Rav. They'll never say yes.
I think.
But in the eyes of Hashem, maybe, I don't know.
Because I know she Moshe Feinstein.
Yeah.
I read actually, the Soviet Union. Then the big issue, his wife wasn't able to go over, to the mikveh. So after having had their said actually Rabbi David Feinstein, who succeeded to one of actually the yeshivas, actually his father, and it passed away unfortunately. After a long life, I suppose. Actually recently, but even so, the gap. Then they come to the United States, and they have actually Rav Reuven Feinstein. So it would be actually that what happened was that Moshe Feinstein and his wife were committed actually to Shitaras and Mishpacha. So they apparently actually said, well, there should no kids actually until.
Unfortunately, yeah.
Situation.
Fortunately, it happened to a great aunt of mine. I mean, her and her husband didn't have any children because there was no mikvah in Russia. And by the time they left Russia, it was already late. They left Russia in the late 40s. And so, do mitzvahs need kavanah? Is kavanah integral? And can one fulfill the mitzvah? At least there's two levels. One is called b'diavad, without kavanah, or b'shas atchak. in a time of great need. So we're holding Yirches Amud Beis. If you have the art scrolls 18b2 in the second column. Says the Gemara, continuing in the Mishnah. Haya Kaisva. If somebody was writing a Megillah, Darsha, or he was explaining the Megillah, Umagia, or he was a cipher and he's fixing a Megillah, and he's reading the words out loud. Im kiven liboy yatzachulu. If he had in mind, had intention to fulfill his obligation of reading the Megillah, with that reading, he's yotzei fulfilled the mitzvah of hearing the Megillah. Otherwise, if he did not have in mind, he was not yotzei. Meaning, we're talking about a person who read the Megillah, because otherwise, if he didn't read it, what are we talking? What's the discussion? He read the Megillah. In order to be yotzei, the Mishnah says kiven. He had to have kavanah in order to fulfill his obligation of hearing the Megillah. Continues the Gemara. Heichi dami. What are the circumstances of the case that if you're writing a Megillah and you're reading it at the same time? At this point, the Gemara is only asking about the writing part, not about the explaining part of the Megillah or the fixing. Because when you're writing a Megillah, you don't have a full Megillah yet in front of you. When you're fixing the Megillah, it's in front of you. When you're explaining the Megillah, it's in front of you. So you can understand your yotzei. But if you're writing a Megillah, you don't yet have a Megillah in front of you. So how? So are you fulfilling your obligation of hearing the Megillah by reciting the Megillah, by reading the Megillah, which is being freshly written as you're speaking? It's not a full Megillah. So was he first reading the pasuk out loud, and then after reading it out loud, he wrote it down? Seemingly, that's not helpful at all, because you're saying it by heart, entire Megillah by heart. We learned before that if you said a minority, a little bit of the Megillah by heart, and not the beginning or the end, as we'll see soon, so then you have your yotzei fulfilled your obligation. However, if you're reading the entire thing by heart, you're not yotzei. So if you're saying the Megillah by heart, a verse by heart, and then writing it down, for sure you're definitely not yotzei. Kikiven liba mehavi. Of what benefit is it to have kavanah, to have in mind, intention to fulfill your obligation? Bal kahu, he's doing it by heart. Ella, the kasab psuko v'karile. So rather, the din of the Mishnah must be saying, the din of the Mishnah says that if you're writing the Megillah and had in mind to fulfill your obligation, you have fulfilled your obligation. It's when he wrote the verse down, and after writing it down, he read it. He's probably reading it again to make sure he wrote it properly, but he's reading it after he wrote it down. So you're reading it mitoch haksav from a Megillah that's written down.
However, you're not having a kavanah necessarily, unless actually we're going to be explaining that the Mishnah meant that someone was having kavanah or something.
No, the Mishnah said in kivin levi, if you had kavanah,
okay.
You had to have. So if you wrote the Megillah and then you're reading that one pasuk out loud, and you had in mind to be yotzei, then you could be yotzei.
Okay.
At this point of the Gemara, the Gemara refutes this suggestion, and the Gemara asks, Umi yatza, would one fulfill their obligation of hearing the Megillah in such a manner that you're writing down a pasuk and then reading it? Reb Chelba said in the name of Reb Chelba bar Guria, who said in the name of Rav, Vafilu Laman de Amar. The next Mishnah on the next daf Yates Amud Aleph, records a machlokes between Reb Meir and Reb Yehuda. From which part of the Megillah do you have to hear? Reb Yehuda holds that even if you missed the beginning, the first chapter and a half of the Megillah, and you only heard from the words Ish Yehudi, the part which introduces Mordechai, you fulfilled the obligation of hearing the Megillah. And Rameir says, no, you must hear the entire Megillah from A to Z. And that's halacha. Halacha is like Rameir. However, even in accordance with Rabbi Yehuda, which says, Afilu man Amar, mi'ish Yehudi, tzricha shetei ksuva kula. Although Rav said halacha is like Rav Meir, that one must hear the entire Megillah. The secondary opinion, the opinion of Rabbi Yehuda in the next Gemara, in the next Mishnah, which says that even if you heard only from Ish Yehudi and onwards, so from the middle of chapter 2 and onwards, you still fulfilled your obligation. That's only if you have a Megillah, that's entire Megillah is written. But if you have a Megillah only written from that point onwards, you have not fulfilled your obligation. In order to be Yotze the Megillah, to fulfill the mitzvah Megillah, it has to be a complete kosher Megillah. If it's missing a little bit in the beginning, or a little bit at the end, or missing or invalid in the majority, then you can't hear from such a Megillah. Therefore, if you have a sofer who's writing a Megillah, and he wrote a pasuk and now he's saying it, so he's reading the Megillah while he's in the very process of writing the Megillah, he can't fulfill his obligation. Because the Megillah is not complete. And from the next Mishnah, we see that one must read the Megillah from the complete Megillah. So rather, the Gemara says, Ella de mancha Megillah kamei. Rather, it is speaking of a case where one has a Megillah in front of them, a kosher Megillah, and v'karila mina psuka v'kasavla. And then one is reading from the kosher Megillah, verse by verse, and then writing the Megillah down. There's a halacha, which we're going to have soon. It was a halacha which, when writing a Sefer Torah, you have to copy from another Sefer, another book. You can't do it by heart. You have to copy from an existing Sefer Torah, or you have what's called a Tikkun Sefer. Many Seferim have a special Tikkun, a book which has like a Sefer Torah written. You have to copy from there as well. You don't have to copy from an actual Torah. I mentioned that there's a certain Sefer, which the way they write down is that they have a clear glass tabletop, a very strong projector projecting through the tabletop onto the parchment. And they're sort of almost tracing onto the cloth. You can't write a Sefer Torah by heart. You have to write a Sefer Torah copying from another Torah or copying from a tikkun, because not everyone is fluent in a Sefer Torah, and therefore you have to copy a Torah from another existing Torah. The same will go with a Megillah. A tefillin and mezuzahs, if a sefer wrote it by heart, it's okay. You're supposed to copy it from another source, but since everyone is very familiar with it, so therefore, if you tefillin mezuzahs, if you did it by heart, it's kosher. If a sefer wrote it down by heart, but a Sefer Torah and a Megillah must be written from another Megillah or from another Sefer Torah.
You need to have the Chumash, like, the Bogash Chumash or whatever.
A Chumash would be fine as well, because the Chumash has the words, right? So the letters you're copying. Many times you have a letter spelled with a vav or without a vav, and the person's not going to know it by heart. But if you're reading from a Chumash, it will be fine as well. The only difference in the Chumash would be is that most Chumashim usually have the ksiv. The Chumash is meant to follow along in shul. So you're following along what the Bakura is reading. Many words in the Torah have what's called a Korean ksiv. It's written one way, but it's read out loud in a different way. So you have to know when is a Korean, when is a ksiv. When is it when you're copying from a chumash, you have to know when the word is actually written differently in the Torah than the way you hear it. For example, the word batcholim and the word batcherim, kiyamaram, biamaram, words are written with a beis and it's pronounced with a chaf. So you just have to know the Kri and the Ksiv. But that would also, that would be fine too. Copying from a chumash, interesting, is fine as well. I thought it was charging. Let's see, let's get it to charge again. So the case of our Mishnah is, in case the computer dies, so let's tell everyone shukayach for joining. So the case of our Mishnah where it says that if one wrote down a Megillah as a sefer and reading verse by verse is in a case where you have a kosher Megillah in front of you. You read a pasuk from the kosher Megillah, and now you're copying from there into a new Megillah. So if you had in mind that when you're reading the pasuk, the verse from the kosher Megillah, you to fulfill your chiyuv, your obligation of hearing the Megillah, then you're yotzei. But not if you're writing a pasuk and then reading it, because in that case you're not actually yotzei because you're not reading the Megillah from a complete Megillah. So we're saying that if you read the Megillah without having in mind to be yotzei, so I'm a sefer, I'm copying from the other Megillah. So I read the pasuk and then I copied it, but I didn't have in mind to be yotzei. I have to read the Megillah again. But if I had in mind while writing the Megillah, I'm copying from a full Megillah, saying the pasuk, and then copying it, and I had in mind to be yotzei, then you have fulfilled your obligation. I think we'll pause over here the Gemara for today. You know what? Actually, we'll have just another few lines. I think we could finish it in the next 3 minutes. Says the Gemara. Lema Misayele Rabba Babrachana. Let's say our Gemara is a proof supports the ruling of Rabba Babrachana, the son of Barchana, who says, Oster lichtov os achas shaloi min haksav. One is not allowed to write a Sefer Torah or Megillah by heart. You must do it from another Megillah or another Sefer Torah. You must copy, but you cannot learn the Megillah. You cannot write a Megillah from memory. Let's say this is a proof from the fact that our Mishnah says that if you had in mind to fulfill your obligation of reading the Megillah, when you're copying from one Megillah to another, I'd say means that you must read, that you're not allowed to write from memory. You have to write it copying from another sefer. Maybe the reason is you might come onto a mistake, and if you're doing it by heart, it's very possible that somebody could make a mistake when writing. So maybe our Mishnah concurs and is a proof that the Megillah, although the Megillah is only midirabanan, it's rabbinical, it's not biblical. I mean, it is meaning midiraisa, but the fact of reading the Megillah is dirabanan. The Mishnah is still telling us that you have to copy it from somewhere else. And for sure, it's Torah, which is midiraisa, hearing a Torah is a biblical obligation. For sure, you cannot write a Torah from memory. You are allowed to copy a Torah from a Torah which is puzzle, which is invalid, but you're not allowed to do it by complete memory. Answers the Gemara, no, Dilma, Disrami le Yisramuye. The Gemara says, no, really it's possible from our Mishnah that you're allowed to write the Megillah from memory. And this, our Mishnah is speaking about a case where one copied a Megillah from one to another, had in mind to be yotzei and then fulfill their obligation, is speaking specifically about a case where someone came upon a Megillah, a kosher Megillah, and that's the way they did it. So our Mishnah is not coming to give an opinion about this matter, if one must write a Torah while copying from another Torah. Our Mishnah is coming merely to discuss the idea if one is reading a Megillah, having him not, which generally, the purpose of him reading the Megillah is to write the new Megillah, but not to fulfill his obligation. Our Mishnah is speaking about that if one had kavanah to be Yotze, they have fulfilled their obligation. But our Mishnah is not discussing or trying to have any bearing on this other halacha, if one must write a Sefer Torah min haksav from another Sefer Torah. Halacha is that one must write another Sefer Torah from another Sefer Torah, as well as a Megillah, if Parshia, Tefillin, and Mezuzos should be written while copying from another Tefillin and Mezuzos, or another Chumash, or a Tikkun Seferim. If one wrote Tefillin and Mezuzos without copying, they're Yotze because it's so common. You have to, another halacha is when you're writing, a Sefer is writing a Sefer Torah or Tefillin Mezuzos, you say the word as you write it. You write the word and then you say it, because that makes sure it's a sort of a review that you didn't make any mistakes. What happens if you have someone who knows a Megillah inside out, or who knows the Torah inside out? Someone like Ezra HaSofer, someone like Rabbi Akiva Eger, somebody like Rameir. We'll learn about that tomorrow. Okay, so Shkaya, thank you for joining.